All right. Good afternoon. Today is Monday, January 25th of 2021. And I'm Tiffany, and I am going live today about Arturo Schomburg. And also added on to that, I am going to be also talking about the National Afro-American, the National Afro-American League. All right. So I'm going to be going in about those two subjects, but I'm going to start with Arturo Schomburg. So Arturo Schomburg, right, who was Afro Latino descent. Okay, but he was also a historian that dealt with African American history and also Afro Latino history as well. So he was born on January the 24th of 1874 in Puerto Rico. So, but he played a pivotal role in the Harlem Renaissance movement during the 1930s. So what I want to do is I'm going to present some sources. All right, some of it's going to be from Wiki1, and some of it's going to be scholarly journals, online scholarly journals at that. So people can look up the information for themselves if they want to find out more. All right. Also, I am going to be... And also after that, I'm going to get into that subject about the National Afro-American League as well. So start with Arturo Schomburg. So who was he? Here's my screen. So Arturo Schomburg, right, was born on January 24th, 1874. He was a historian, a writer, a collector, and an activist. And Schomburg was a Puerto Rican of African and German descent. He moved to the United States in 1891, where he researched and raised awareness of the great contribution that Afro-Latin Americans and African Americans had made to society. He was an important intellectual figure in the Harlem Renaissance. Over the years, he collected literature, art, slave narratives, and other material of African history, which were purchased to become the basis of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, named in his honor at the New York Public Library branch in Harlem. Okay. So he was born in a town called Santurce in Captaincy General of Puerto Rico to Mary Joseph, a freeborn Black midwife from St. Croix in the Danish West Indies, and Carlos Federico Schomburg, a merchant and a son of a German immigrant to Puerto Rico. While Schomburg was in grade school, one of his teachers claimed that Black people had no history, heroes, or accomplishment. Inspired to prove the teacher wrong, Schomburg determined that he would find and document the accomplishment of Africans on their own continent and in the diaspora. Schomburg was educated at St. Juan Instituto Popular, where he learned commercial printing at St. Thomas College on the island of St. Thomas in the Danish West Indies. He studied Negro literature. So Puerto Rico independence and advocate. Schomburg immigrated to New York City on April 17, 1891, and settled in the Harlem section of Manhattan. He settled into a Puerto Rican enclave of a Cuban area, which was known for its nationalist intellectuals and politically radical cigar workers. He continued his studies to untangle the African thread of history in the fabric of Americas. After experiencing racial discrimination in the U.S., he began calling himself Afro-Boricua, which means Afro-Puerto Rican. He became a member of the Revolutionary Committee of Puerto Rico and became an active advocate of Puerto Rico's and Cuba's independence from Spain. In 1892, Schomburg co-founded Las Dos Antillas, the two islands, a political club that advocated for the independence of Cuba and Puerto Rico. The club existed from 1892 to 1898, and members discussed issues such as providing weapons, medical supplies, and financial aid to independence movements. All right, peace to the brother in the chat. Thank you for coming through. So, therefore, Arturo Schomburg When he came to America, he already had in his mind what he wanted to do, and he already had it mapped out. He said, okay, when I come here, I already know what my intention is going to be. He wanted to further his study into history, and he was more interested in learning more about the African Latinos and African Americans, so that way he can present the information to disprove others who said that African descended people had no history. See, remember in his time period when he was coming up, a lot of them were taught that Black people didn't have history prior to slavery. A lot of them were taught that Black people weren't intellectual enough. So they had to go and do their own research and say, well, you know what? Let's challenge their consensus. Let's vet the sources they're putting out there. And once we vet those sources, we can prove them they're wrong and they not right. So he, from early on, caught on to the white supremacy. He caught on to the racial tactics. He caught on to it just by doing his own research. So he was not the one that was easily convinced that Black people had no history. He said, no, I'm going to disprove this. I'm going to discredit this because this is a lie. And he was determined to do so. But let's continue. So let's look at his marriage. On June 30th, 1895, Schomburg married Elizabeth Hatcher of Staunton, Virginia. She had come to New York as part of a wave of migration from the South that would increase in the 20th century and be known as the Great Migration. They had 3 sons, Maximo Gomez. He was named after the Dominican military leader of the Cuban struggle for independence. Arthur Alfonso Jr., Kinsley Goranes Schomburg. His middle name was the name of a renowned Taino Indian cacique. After Elizabeth died in 1900, right? Schomburg married Elizabeth Morrow Taylor of Williamsburg, a village in Rockingham County, North Carolina. They were married on March 17, 1902, and had 2 sons, Reginald Stanton and Nathaniel Jose Schomburg. After Elizabeth Morrow Taylor's death, he married Elizabeth Green, with whom he had 3 more children. So in total, right? He had 8 children by 3 different women he married, and 2 of them had died. Okay, so let's look at his career. So in 1896, Schomburg began teaching Spanish in New York. From 1901 to 1906, Schomburg was employed as messenger and clerk in the law firm of Pryor, Mellis, and Harris, New York City. In 1906, he began working for the Bankers Trust Company. Later, he became a supervisor of the Caribbean and Latin American mail section and held that until he left in 1929. While supporting himself and his family, Schomburg began his intellectual work of writing about Caribbean and African American history. His first known article is Haiti Descent or Dedicant. Was it Haiti? Is Haiti Decant? Was published in 1904. The Unique Advertiser. In 1909, he wrote Placido, a Cuban Martyr, a short pamphlet about a poet and the independent fighter Gabriel de la Concepcion Valadez. All right, so let's go ahead and continue down where it says the Negro Society for Historical Research. All right, so I'm just going to read the first 3 paragraphs. In 1911, Schomburg co-founded with John Edward Bruce the Negro Society for Historical Research to create an institute to support scholarly efforts. For the first time, it brought together African, West Indian, Afro Afro-American scholars. In 1914, Schomburg joined the exclusive African Negro Academy, becoming from 1920 to 1928 the fifth and last president of the organization. Founded in Washington, D.C. in 1897, this first major African-American learned society brought together scholars, editors, and activists to refute racist scholarship, promote Black claims to individual, social, political equality, and publish the history and sociology of African American life. This was a period of the founding of societies to encourage scholarship in African American history. In 1915, Dr. Carter G. Woodson co-founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, now the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, and began publishing the Journal of Negro History. Schomburg became involved in the Harlem Renaissance movement, which spread to other African American communities in the U.S. The concentration of Blacks in Harlem from across the U.S. and the Caribbean led to the flowering of arts, intellectual, and political movements. He was the co-editor of the 1912 edition of Daniel Alexander Payne Murray's Encyclopedia of the Colored Race. And that's the reason why I'm reading it like that. So to all the people that say, well, the idea of Pan-Africanism, Black nationalism, and the immigrants and the non-immigrants, y'all creating this dichotomy that don't exist. I mean, it does exist, but it don't exist on the larger level. This goes to show how oblivious you are when it comes to your history. Did you not see what I just read? Arturo Schomburg, who happened to be a Latino descendant man from Puerto Rico, Afro Latino at that, connected with other brothers and sisters from various parts of the Caribbean and in the United States to compile history and list of information. So in other words, what I'm telling you is, if it wasn't for people like him, if it wasn't for people like Carter G. Woodson, if it wasn't for people like Dr. John Henrik Clarke, all these people that you admire, W.E.B. Du Bois, all these folks that you admire, you would not have a chance to even get to know about African American history, or even those in the Caribbean, in the Latino area. You wouldn't even got a chance to know that. These are the people that built and created the foundation, put up the platform for you to have the access to learn your information, to learn your history. People like Booker T. Washington was the reason why Black people was inspired to start their own school. They put up these foundations. They put up these sources for a reason. They put out scholarly journals, and it kind of upsets me, because every time you go on the internet, people go on the internet looking for other things, right? But the very information they're trying to debunk is right in their face. The very same information you try to debunk or you try to throw under the bus is right in your face. It's right there. And you got scholarly journals. You got the Journal of Black Studies. Okay? You got the what's the name of it? You got the Negro Society for Historical Research. Okay? You got the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's journals out there regarding to Black history. It's right in front of you. You just have to take the time to look for it. And I want to throw this out there before I continue. Now, also, Arturo Schomburg was of a biracial background, okay? His mother happened to be from St. Croix, which is in the West Indies, and his father happened to be of a German descent. But let me show you this. See, people who are biracial, all right, especially those who have Black in them, they're going to, most of the time, they're going to connect with that side because they understand the rich history of Black people. They have that connection with that lineage because they know what their ancestor on that side of the family, whether it be their mother's side or their father's side, have gone through. So they sympathize. They automatically have a connection. Now, there's some of them that don't want to even have anything to do with that part of them. There are those that's like that, but there are those who were so connected with their African roots that they did not want to detach themselves for it. They don't even talk about their other half. It's not that they didn't love that other half of them. It's just that they were so attached with the African part of them. So you had people who were mulatto, biracial, that had played a pivotal role in the Black community. Frederick Douglass, he was a biracial man, but he still identified as a Black man. Booker T. Washington, he was biracial, but still identified as a Black man. Prince Hall was biracial, but still identified as a Black man. I think Benjamin Banneker, his mother was biracial, still identified as a Black man. Malcolm X's mama, who was biracial, and that was because her mother was raped by a white man. Right? Her mama was raped by a white man, but she was determined to be with a Black man. She got with a Black man who was a Garveyite and had Malcolm in the picture. So let's not sit here and let's not just go around discrediting our people who are biracial or mulatto. Let's not do that. Because those people were the ones that had their hands into our history. They were the ones that created these foundations that we stand upon. And there were, just like there was a lot of African, predominantly African descended ancestors that was in slavery, there were those who were mulatto that was enslaved. You know why? Because most of them came from Black mamas. And anybody that know about the partis cinquanta ventrum, look up the partis cinquanta ventrum, which means that whatever the status of your mother is, that's what you are. So if your mother was a slave, you were going to be born as a slave. If your mother was free, you were going to be born free. That was the laws back then. So many of them had Black mothers because their mothers were byproducts of rape. They were byproducts of rape. Or the slave master married them at a very young age and had children with them. See, this is what you got to understand. So yes, if somebody is biracial, they have a right to claim their African lineage because that's a part of them that's not going to die. That's their DNA. They can't erase that DNA away from them because you don't get to say, because you biracial, you don't get to claim Black. Who are you? You nobody. You nobody to say that. That's not their fault because they're biracial. They ain't had nothing to do with why their parents made that choice. Hell, you got the singer, what's his name? Jadena. Jadena is a rapper / musician. He was born in America, but his mother happened to be a Caucasian woman. His father was from Nigeria. I think his father was a chief. But he is so connected with his African root. He's so connected with his bloodline that came from Nigeria. And his father was of a Yoruba descent. A Yoruba tribe. His father was of a Yoruba tribe. So he's so connected with that. He mentioned it every time he sang that song, every time he dancing, every time he in the videos, he always mentioned his father. He always have a picture of his father. So I just wanted to put that out there. I don't mean to get off the subject, but I just want to throw that out there because, people that make these arguments about those who are biracial, it's so vague. You have no point. You're just attacking. You're just looking to be a bully. You're not making no point. And if you want to be technical, we are a 100% nothing. We ain't 100% anything. You either 90% or 98%, and that's the closest you're gonna get. You're not gonna get 100%. And if so, that's very rare. It's very rare if you get 100%. But overall, in general, especially us Black people here in America, we ain't 100% because we all got some form of mixture in our blood somewhere, especially those of European descent. And maybe those that are Native American, maybe. But for the most part, it's European descent that's mixed in us because of historical events that have taken place throughout the course of slave history and beyond. All right, so let me go ahead and continue. All right, so now in 1916, Schomburg published what was the first notable bibliography of African American poetry, the bibliographical checklist of American Negro poetry. Excuse me, the mispronunciation. In March of 1925, Schomburg published his essays, The Negro Digs Up His Past, in an issue of Survey graphic devoted to the intellectual life of Harlem. It had widespread distribution and influence. The autodidact historian John Henrik Clarke told of being so inspired by the essay that at the age of 17, he left home in Columbus, Georgia, to seek out Mr. Schomburg to further his studies in African history. Allen Locke included the essay in his edited collection, The New Negro. So yes, Dr. John Henrik Clarke learned under the scholarship of and Dr. Arturo Schomburg. It was Dr. Schomburg who taught Dr. John Henrik Clarke. It was him. Give me a second. Yeah, it was him. It was Dr. Schomburg. Thank you. Peace to the chat. I appreciate y'all coming through. It was Dr. Schomburg that taught Dr. John Henrik Clarke. And Dr. John was autodidact. He learned a lot on his own, but he learned some information from people like Schomburg, people like Carl G. Woodson. They took him under their wings and taught him what he needed to know about Black people. And he furthered that information on. He furthered that education, that scholarship. I have done a video about Dr. John Henrik Clarke, so you can check it out on my channel. If you get a chance to, just look up Dr. John Clarke. But yeah, these two men played a prominent role in Dr. Clarke's life. Let's go ahead and let's continue on. All right, so the Schomburg's collection. All right, the Schomburg's collection of Negro literature and art. The NYPL and the librarian of the 135th Street branch, Ernestine Rose, purchased his extensive collection of literature, art, and other materials in 1926. They appointed Schomburg curator of the Schomburg collection of Negro literature and art, named in his honor at the 135th Street branch, Harlem, of the library. It was later renamed the Arthur Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. All right. And it says he was granted an honorary membership of Men's Business Club in Yonkers, New York. He also held the position of treasurer for the Loyal Sons of Africa in New York, and was elevated being the past member of Prince Hall, Lodge number 38, Free and Accepted Masons, and Rising Sun Chapter number 4, RAM. So yes, Arturo Schomburg was a Mason. Arturo Schomburg was a Mason. Yes. He was a part of the Prince Hall Masonry. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go to New York. I want to go to New York one day and actually visit the Schomburg Library, Divine. I really do. I want to go to New York one day. Just so I can go there and just actually, it's a lot of places that I want to visit in New York. It's a lot of places I want to, but that's one of them on my top list to go. So yes, Arturo Schomburg was a Mason. And for those of you that be talking about these Masons, the way you do this whole Illuminati, secret society, and try to give them a bad name, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. You can't even go into the actual teaching and the degrees they have. But yet and still you talk about how they are such, I mean, try to label a bad image. Just because somebody is in the Masonic organization does not make them a bad person. Okay? And if you want to know about Masonry, it's basically fraternal order, brotherhood. That's all it is. It's just a fraternal order. Where you think the Greek organization get their idea from? It's a fraternal order. So they have membership, they have guidelines, they have rules that comply with those that's in the membership organization. Now, I'm not saying everybody that's perfect, that I'm not saying that everybody that's a Mason is perfect. No, that's not what I'm saying. But everybody that's in the Masonic organization ain't always bad either. You gotta be careful how you put labels on people and how you stereotype them. That's all I'm saying. All right. Okay, so let's go down to his later years. Following dental surgery, Schomburg became ill and died in Mason Park Hospital, Brooklyn, New York, on June the 10th, 1938. He is buried in the Locust Grove section of Cypress Hills Cemetery. Yep, so he has passed on. And this is a picture of Mr. Arturo Schomburg right here. That's him as a young man. That's him. All right, so I have some more information that I want to show you guys. So if you want to further research on more scholarship, here's one of them. This is called the website is called jastor.org. Jastor, JSTOR.org. And this information comes from the University of Illinois Press, Immigration and Ethnic History Society. All right. So it's called The Migration of Arturo Schomburg on Being Antillano, Negro, and Puerto Rican in New York, 1891 to 1938. The author is Jesse Huffman Goskov, and it was published in 2001. So let's see what else can we find about Arturo Schomburg. All right, so I'm It says biography is in many ways the ideal vehicle for elaborating this sort of overlapping, unpredictable or fluid group identity. But the story of one extraordinary man with all its migration and uncertainties only can only be extrapolated to an entire community with great caution. In Schomburg's case, the greatest limitation is that of timing. For Schomburg's first 20 years in New York, there were probably never more than 1,500 Puerto Ricans on mainland of the United States. The first great migration of laborers and families from the island started in the middle of 1920s. By the 1930s, when Puerto Rican emerged in the hands of community leaders and racist white North Americans as racialized ethnic identity that was neither Black nor white, Schomburg was a veteran Negro New Yorker. He maintained some friendships with Spanish speakers, but lived a life that was unquestionably isolated from Latino social and political organization. Even if Afro-Puerto Rican migrants in the 1930s were less passive in the construction of Puerto Rican identity in New York than has been presumed, they were neither led by Schomburg nor did they follow his example. All right. And it go on to say it's also difficult to extrapolate his experience back onto the social life on the island of Puerto Rico in the 1890s because early Puerto Ricans' migration to mainland was small. The majority of the island population in those years did not share Schomburg's experiences as an exile, a nationalist, and an immigrant. There were ties between his activities in New York and some local centers of activism in the island, and at the very least, an image Puerto Rican nation reside at the center of his politics. But placing Schomburg within the groups, networks, and association that shaped his early migrant experiences, it is clear that Cuba figured more prominently in them than Puerto Rico. In the 1890s, Schomburg, along with a multiracial group of working class Puerto Rican exiles adhering to the larger Cuban community in New York, they helped build a nationalist politics of class and race that resonate more closely with the deep social conflicts in Cuba than with the relative calm in Puerto Rico. For this handful of Puerto Rican exile, the alliance with the Cubans was in itself an important and much contested symbol of both their nationalism and their progressive racial agenda. Then it goes on to say Schomburg's migration and his racial consciousness reflected a moment of overlapping diasporas as trade, migration, imperialism, and warfare encouraged newly mobile intellectual in the Caribbean basin to form international identities. And in the 1880s and 1890s, the thinkers and militants who first proposed a Puerto Rican national project left the colony to join the network of Cuban revolutionary exiles in the United States, Latin America, and Europe. The very internationalism of their movement, marked by steam, travel, correspondence, migration, and in international intellectual exchange, also opened up space for Puerto Rican nationalists to imagine themselves as part of other networks of allies in the Atlantic world. Puerto Rican separatists joined the Antillean Union led by the Cubans. Working class nationalists built alliance with Cuban and Spanish workers and eventually joined the Second International and Socialist Party in New York. And some Puerto Ricans, including Schomburg, built alliances with Cubans of color around their struggles to define a racially progressive nationalism. Cuban intellectuals worked within the framework of a multiracial nationalist politics, feeling comparatively less attraction to strong messages of Black nationalism than, say, Jamaicans. But in the Puerto Rican and Cuban circles, Schomburg frequent in New York. This race-blind nationalism was the terrain for intense conflict about race and history. All right. So, Arturo Schomburg came from both worlds. Okay? He came from both worlds of the Latino community and the African community. So he can relate as someone that's Puerto Rican on a national level, okay, because of his nationality. So he can relate to the Spanish-speaking community, but he also can relate to being Black because of his African descendancy, because of his mother, and the fact that she was born as a free person and her parents were enslaved in the Caribbeans. So he come from both worlds. Now, his counterparts, those who were Puerto Ricans, they didn't so much relate to him on the level of Black nationalism. But when it came to identifying with their Latino roots, they was in the same boat, in the same bracket. But when it came to Black nationalism in that sense, they weren't really so much incoherent with him on that level. So, all right. Let's see what else I have. All right, so I have another source right here that I'm not going to read, but I'm just going to show you guys if you want to read for yourself. If you want to read for yourself, all right. So this source right here is called, nope, that's the wrong one, my bad. This source right here, it is called the Modernism and Boricua Literature, a reconsideration of Arturo Schomburg and William Carlos Williams. Lisa Sanchez Gonzalez, which was written in 2001. Okay. All right, so maybe I'll just read a little bit of it. It says, although many would like to claim otherwise, William Carlos Williams and Arturo Schomburg were Boricuas, members of the Puerto Rico stateside colonial diaspora, as the evidence surrounding both their families' histories made clear. Williams' mother, Elena Hohib Williams, was born in Mayagüez, a city of Puerto Rico's western coast, sometime during the mid-19th century. Elena's brother, Carlos, introduced her to her future husband, William George Williams. After they married, the couple moved to the U.S., ultimately settling in New Jersey suburb. Although Williams' father may have been born in England, he was culturally shaped by the Caribbean as well. Raised from a very young age in the Dominican Republic, William George Williams was most comfortable speaking in Spanish. All right, I'm sorry about that. So let me go back to where I was reading. There we go. So it says, although many would like to claim otherwise, William Carlos Williams and Arturo Afro Schomburg were Boricuas, members of Puerto Rico's stateside colonial diaspora, as the evidence surrounding both their families' histories make clear. Williams' mother, Elena Hoheb Williams, born in Mayagüez, a city on Puerto Rico's western coast, sometime during the mid-19th century. Elena's brother, Carlos, introduced her to her future husband, William George Williams. After they married, the couple moved to United States, ultimately settling in New Jersey suburb. Although Williams' father may have been born in England, he was culturally shaped by the Caribbean as well. Raised from a very young age in the Dominican Republic, William George Williams was most comfortable speaking in Spanish, which was the primary language spoken in the Williams, New Jersey household. Without question, William Carlos Williams was born into the diaspora in Puerto Rican, Dominican, and West Indian history he publicly claimed, both in his autobiography and more empathetically in his biography of his mother, yes, Mrs. William. Okay. Williams' migratory family history in the Caribbean, as well as his bilingual, bicultural formation in the U.S., fit a common profile in the Boricua community during the first half of the 20th century. And Schomburg also claimed his Puerto Rican heritage. Likewise, his apparently complicated family history was not at all anomalous with the Boricua community during the late 19th and early 20th century. Schomburg spent some time apparently with his maternal great uncle in St. Croix while he was still a teenager. Then soon after migrated to New York City, when he arrived in the U.S., his life also resembles common Boricua experiences. He became an expatriate activist for Puerto Rican independence, then married, established a career, started a family, and settled in Brooklyn. All right, so this is the source and information you guys can read upon on your own if you want to. So you just go on jaster.org and look under Oxford Journal, Oxford University Press, Modernism and Boricua Literature, a reconsideration of Arturo Schomburg and William Carlos Williams. Okay. And also, if you didn't know, is that Arturo Schomburg had a cookbook that he wrote. So yes, he had his own cookbook, but he did not finish it. So here it is. All right. So it says, this comes from the University of Georgia Press. Chapter title, The Negro Cooks Up His Past, Arturo Schomburg's Uncompleted Cookbook. All right. Recipes for Respect, African-American Meals and Meaning. Rafasa Safir. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's skip down a little bit. All right, here it is. That Schomburg's groundbreaking compendium was never completed is something of a mystery. Textual evidence dates its composition around 1930, suggests there were some years between its initial draft and his death in 1938. Its unfinished state perhaps attests to the vastness of the subject he contemplated, coupled with the primary sources available. Menus, cookbooks, and hospitality guides were even more rare than the books, pamphlet prints, and old engravings. Writing on social service and reform and efforts towards race emancipation, colonization, and race betterment that made up nearly the entire original collection. All right, so it says of the S1022 manuscript pages, 9 are arranged in menu format, broken down into daily meal times with subheads for categories such as breads and meat. The introductory pages indicate he planned to write biographies of prominent and little-known cooks alike and reveal the history of cooking in the United States as shaped by those of African descent. The handwritten notes that followed the type proposal and preceded the La Cuisine Creole recipes for gumbo of okra and filet illustrate the range of Schomburg's inquiry. Schomburg's tomb could have been in omnibus that stretch over centuries. American states and extranational locales. The enormous scope was in keeping with Schomburg's collection and unparalleled gathering of materials about those of African descent housed under one roof. His gastronomy would showcase the Negro genius in gastronomic history by discussing the recipe prepared by blacks, presenting personality sketches of many famous Negro cooks, past and present, and celebrating the folk arts and lore that constituted vernacular cookery. And it goes on to say Schomburg's proposal asserted that cuisine prepared and developed by African Americans range from the simplest homestyle meal to elaborate French derived feasts. Within its pages are acknowledged the two streams of black gastronomy dating from slavery times, noting cabin cooking and cooking for the big house, while suggesting the black diner's preference for his own flavoring dishes as contrasted with the more elaborated ones which he prepared in his master's kitchens. The dishes included also tend to hail from foodways associated with the American South, a perception that still persists. Even as diets slowly changed in the 19th century as slaves accessed more Europeanized foodstuffs and the forced migration of African to the southeastern United States declined, the African culinary grammar survived. The work of diasporic food scholars such as Jessica Harris, Leland Ferguson, and Judith Carney, who have written extensively about African gastronomic legacy, laid decades in the future. Schomburg's culinary history would have been the first to remark on key differences between big house and quarters dining, a distinction that can be seen across regions. So here it is, figure 7-1, the sole handwritten page from Schomburg cookbook, courtesy of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, Photograph, and Print Divisions. All right, so it's like a little rough draft that he did. He didn't necessarily finish all of it, but here's one of it right here. All right, so that's enough source for today about Arturo Schomburg. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to also get into the history about the give me a second. All right. So the next information I'm going to show and present is the National Afro-American League. Now, let me post up the information about the National Afro-American League real quick. All right. All right, Dan. So all right, so these are the members, or these were the members of the National Afro League. So who were they? Well, let's go to the WikiWine source. Did y'all see that? All right. So the National Afro-American League was founded on 1890 by Timothy Thomas Fortune. Preceding the foundation of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the organization dedicated itself to racial solidarity and self-help. In September 1898, Fortune presided at a meeting in Rochester, New York, called by M.E. Zion Bishop Alexander Walters for the purpose of rejuvenating the league. The new organization, named the National Afro-American Council, existed until 1908. Waters was the first president of the council, while Fortune was the first chairman of the executive committee. Many who originally supported the league and later the council eventually started donating to the NAACP, which later became one of the most powerful anti-segregationist group. All right, so here it is, and let's look at a little bit about who Thomas Fortune is. So this is the founder right here. Okay, he was one of the founders. All right. So who was he? Maybe you'll hear about him again, but I'm just going to read a little bit about his background. All right. All right, then. So it says he was born on October the 3rd, 1856. June the 2nd, that's when he died in 1928. He was an American orator, civil rights leader, journalist, writer, editor, and publisher. He was the highly influential editor of the nation's leading Black newspaper, the New York Age, and was the leading economist in the Black community. He was a longtime advisor to Booker T. Washington and was the editor of Washington's first autobiography, The Story of My Life and Work. Fortune's philosophy of militant agitation on behalf of the civil right, on the behalf of the rights of Black people, laid one of the foundation of the civil rights movement. Okay, now there was another civil rights movement before the one that we know. Now the one that we're familiar with, the second civil rights movement, which was Dr. King's. That's the one that was organized by him in the 60s. But this is the very first civil rights movement. Okay. This was the very first civil rights movement that took place. But not a lot of people spoke much about. All right, so anyways, let me get back to him. And you're going to hear more about him later on, but let's just look into more information, see what we can find. All right, so it says he co-founded the National Afro-American League to right wrongs against African American, authorized by law and sanctioned or tolerated by public opinion. The league fell apart after 4 years when it was revived in Rochester, New York on September 15, 1898. It had new name of the National Afro-American Council, okay, with Bishop Alexander Walters as its first president and Fortune as a prominent member. Walters was followed as president by Fortune, who held the position from 1902 to 1904, and was succeeded by William Henry Stewart. Booker T. Washington played a prominent role on the council, and it included a number of important leaders, including W.E.B. Du Bois, who went on to form the NAACP, and anti-lynching activist Ida B. Wells, the League and the Council had a vital role in setting the stage for the Niagara Movement, NAACP, and other civil rights organizations to follow. Fortune was also the leading advocate of using Afro-American. Wait a minute, hold on. Let me read that again. Let's read that again. Fortune was also the leading advocate of using Afro-American to identify his people. Since they are African in origin and American in birth, it was his argument that it was most accurately define them. That's him. So he was one of the first to identify himself as an Afro-American. The term African American been around for the longest, but he identified as Afro-American, meaning that I am African descended that happened to be born in America. And this was the national the National Afro-American League was the predecessor of all the Black national organization, the civil rights organization that we know of, such as the NAACP, such as the Southern Council Leadership Conference, also SNCC, which is Student Nonviolent Committee Coordination. All these organizations derived out of the National Afro-American League. The National Afro-American League was the predecessor of the NAACP and all the rest of them that came after. But again, you won't hear much about it. You won't hear much about the first civil rights movement. You won't hear much about the National Afro-American League. But let's go into more details. Anyways, also I want to show you, if you want to look up information about this, you can just go ahead and go on the website. And also you can look at the references at the bottom of the page. Okay. So let's give credit to where credit is due. All right, now let's look under here. The National Afro-American League from 1887 to 1908 by Emmylou Thornborough, the Journal of Southern History, and it was written in 1961. Published by Southern Historical Association. Here it goes. Now let's see what else can we find regarding to this organization. It says, today, almost a century after the abolition of slavery in the United States, the fight to secure equal civil and political rights for Negroes continues. For half a century, the most conspicuous part in the fight has been played by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, but it was not the first organization with this objective. In the latter part of the 19th century, there were several unsuccessful and almost forgotten attempts at permanent organization to fight against racial discrimination. Of these, the most important was the National Afro-American League, which was later revived as the National Afro-American Council. So completely has this organization have forgotten that the best general history of the Negro in the United States does not even mention it, but speak of the Niagara movement found in 1905 as the first organized attempt to raise the Negro protest against the Great Reaction after the Reconstruction. The dominant figure in the Afro-American League was T. Thomas Fortune, the editor of New York Age, who was regarded by his contemporaries as the most able Negro journalist of his day, although he made his reputation in the North, Fortune knew from personal experience what it was to be a Negro in the South during the Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction era. Born a slave in 1856, he saw the Ku Klux Klan in action as a boy in Marana, Florida, the scene of some of its worst outrages. With little formal education, but with practical knowledge of the apprentice trade, Fortune came to New York in 1879. Soon after his arrival, he became part owner and editor of his own newspaper, The Globe, which later became The Freeman, and finally, The Age. The reputation of The Age as the best Negro paper of its day rested principally on the editorial page, which was an expression of Fortune's views and personality. His editorials, sometimes bitter, sometimes sarcastically humorous in their denunciation of all forms of racial discrimination, attracted compliment in white press in both the North and the South. And check this out. In 1887, just 10 years after the end of Reconstruction, Fortune called upon Negroes to form an organization to fight for the rights denied them. The legal status of Negroes were not yet as degraded as it was to become in a few years, but the guarantees of the 14th and 15th Amendments were already being widely ignored in the South. And in the North, there was generally acquiescence in this state of affairs. An editorial in the Freeman of May 28, 1887, Fortune said, "We think that has been thoroughly demonstrated that the white papers of this country have determined to leave the colored man to fight his own battles. There is no dodging the issue. We have got to take hold of this problem ourselves and make so much noise that all the world shall know the wrongs we suffer and our determination to right these wrongs." He called for the organization of the National Afro-American League, and lists 6 principal grievances which organization should combat. First on the list, he put the suppression of voting rights in the South, which he said had the effects of denying Negroes a voice in the government in the very states in which they were most numerous. Second, he attacked the universal and landable reign of lynch and mob law, which was all the most outrageous because it existed in states where the lawmaking and law enforcing machinery were in the hands of the persons who resorted to these lawless methods. The third grievance was the inequities in the distribution of funds between white and colored schools. The fourth was the odious and demoralizing penitentiary system of the South, with its chain gangs, convict lists, and indiscriminate missing of male and females. Fifth was the tyranny practiced by Southern railroads, which denied equal rights to colored passengers and permitted white passengers to subject them to indignities. Sixth and last was the denial of accommodation to Negroes in such places as hotels and theaters. Except for the last, all of the grievances were either peculiar to the southern states or were more aggravated in that region than in the North, because the most serious injustices were found in the South, because the bulk of the Negro population lived there. Fortune felt that the stronghold of the organization should be in the South, while the North, its principal function would be to arouse public opinion and to exert political pressure. He recognized the peculiar difficulties to be faced in setting up such an organization where freedom of speech and assembly on the part of Negroes were curtailed. He admitted that Southern members might be subjected to personal danger. He even intimated that the use of force might be necessary under some circumstances when he said, "We propose to accomplish our purpose by the peaceful methods of agitation through the ballots and the courts. But if others use weapons of violence to combat our peaceful arguments, it is not for us to run away from violence." Later realizing that his advocacy of violence would probably proved fatal to the cause he was trying to promote. Fortune retreated in an article explaining the Constitution, which he proposed for the League. He explained that the purpose should be to secure the ends desired through peaceful and lawful means, and that members who engage in acts of violence might be expelled. All right, a large part of the Negro press in both the North and the South, as well as a few prominent individuals, at once gave an enthusiastic support to the League idea. From Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, youthful and still relatively unknown Booker T. Washington wrote, "Push the battle to the gate. Let there be no uphold until a league shall be found in every village." But other Southern Negroes warned of dangers and practical difficulties in attempting such a movement in the South. All right. And that's all for this information. So if you guys want to look up more about the National Afro-American League, you can just go on jastor.org, JSTOR.org. All right. And it's published by Southern Historical Association. Okay. So that's where you can go and find out more information regarding to this history and whatnot. So this is one, the organization that has went unnoticed and have not been acknowledged nor been talked about in the history book. So when you go to these secondary schools and even some universities, they're going to pick and choose what they want you to know. All right, or what they feel like is important. And we're talking about the educational system. They're not going to really go into the plethora of information regarding to us. So it's up to us as a people to do the homework assignment, do the research, question the narratives. Okay, that's what we have to do. We must question these narratives. But anyways, that's all I have for today. And what I'm getting ready to do is I'm going to log off of here. But I thank every last one of you for tuning in and watching my videos. I really do. As you guys can tell, I am blocked from my Facebook channel because of the comments and the arguments I had with certain people. So yes, Facebook had blocked me for a few days or whatnot. So I won't be back and active until after the 29th. For those of you that's on my Facebook page. But until then, thank you guys for tuning in and watching. So if you guys want to share this channel, please do so. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the notification bell. Make sure you like the channel and all that great stuff. And if you want to send something to the Cash App, that's the Cash App information at the bottom of the page. If you want to send that, if that's your way of saying, you appreciate what I'm doing and you're thankful, please make sure you do so. Until then, please take it easy, be safe, and I forgot to mention, I think the reason why the National Afro-American League is considered as inactive now is because during that time period, the founder, Thomas Fortune, was a very radical individual. Like Booker T. Washington, at that time, they thought he was too radical. They thought Carter G. Woodson was too radical, which they were, and they had their rights to be. However, because of what was going on and all the tensions that was taking place with the white mobs in the South and the lynching, there was Black people that felt that this movement should not be continued because they felt like it was going to get more Black people killed. And because of the idea that Thomas Fortune preached as far as a self-defense, this was way before the Black Panther Party even was thought of. He was one of the first to preach the concept of self-defense. He was one of the first to say, you know what, if we get attacked, we have the right to fight back. But we're going to practice peaceful protest and lawfulness. But if they put their hands on us, we're going to have to do something about it. That was his attitude. And that's when people felt like, okay, this man's being too radical. He talking about fighting back, but that's going to get us all killed. But even with the peaceful protest, even when the nonviolence, people were still getting killed at numbers. Hence, the civil rights movement. Look at what took place in Alabama, in Selma, Alabama. People was getting sprayed with water hose. People was getting sick by dogs, getting beat with sticks and bats. People was losing their lives, and they were practicing nonviolence. But anyways, that's all I have. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Until next time, please take it easy. And this is your girl, Tiffany, and I'm logging off. All right. Thank you. Peace.